continue the conversation that we began in the worship service, and so I am really, truly grateful for your presence here today. Again, my name is McCallister, and I serve on the conference staff as the Associate Conference Minister for Youth and Young Adults. And before we do anything else today, I want to ask how many people have one of these? Now, if you've got one of these, hold it up. Got at least one? Okay, at least one. Some people have two. No, need one. All right. Would you do this? Can you see how many folks would do this? Okay. Most folks are willing to do that. I need a volunteer who is willing to do that. Okay. Is there one? Hey, my man. Thank you very much, sir. All right. You are going to be in charge of the site. Your name, sir? Luke. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce you to my very faithful assistant, Luke. Luke and I have not rehearsed this routine in advance, so I want to say any errors that occur should be charged to me and not to Luke, who's clearly fabulous. Okay? So anything that goes wrong, it's on me, it's not on Luke. Now, Luke, this is how it's going to go. These two buttons here advance the slides. Okay? You use that on your thumb, either one, right? To advance the slides. Now, when I'd like for you to advance the slide, I'm going to point at you like this, right? When I point, you sort of slide, right? Let's try it. Yeah, it's down. Very nice. Very well done. Now, here's the thing that makes this tricky, Luke. I like to use my hands a lot. And so you got to really keep a good eye on me when I'm just using my hands and when I point. See what I mean? So you know when I do that, you got to use this. When I do that, you use this. When I do that, you use this. There you go. Right. Now, if I'm doing all this, don't do that. Right? I'm like, hey, oh, hip hop, right? Don't do that. Don't do this. Right? But if I do this, then you do that. Cool. My man, give it up for anything that goes wrong, anything at all, charge it to me and not to Luke, because he is clearly fabulous. Everybody clap it up for Luke. How do we know that Luke is fabulous? I'll tell you how we know. Because many of us had this, but only one was willing to use it for God. Give it up. That's how it is at the church, right? Often, we all possess a particular gift, right? It can be really difficult to identify the one who is willing. Aha! See that? See that? Any guy? Give it up.
Step in front of your camera.
He's like, oh, I see you. And so Luke is willing to utilize his gift in a way that serves the church, and so we are grateful for that. I want to begin by just making you aware that there are handouts on the table. Hopefully there is a handout in your seat. If there's not one in your seat because we've run out, I will certainly make this presentation available to Pastor Berkey, and you can get one from her. But in the interim, if you would just share with a friend, that would be great. What you have in the handout is exactly what you're going to see on the screen. But I know often, in terms of concepts, it's helpful if you hold it in your hand and you can kind of write notes about what we're talking about, okay? But what I wanted to make you aware of, the handouts that are on the side, are a few things that are coming up. Number one, it is that time of year. Silver Lake registration is open. Round of applause. Thank you. Someone got the round of applause, Joe. Thank you very much. You get the gold star right after Luke. So registration is open. Silver Lake is one of the many programs that we offer in the summertime for youth and for young adults. If you have a young person, you have a young adult in your life, please ask them to go out to the website, take one of these brochures, take a look at all of the different resources we have. Maybe you want to go and serve as a counselor, or you want to serve, there in a volunteer capacity. Come in and be present. It's a wonderful week off in what we love to call God's backyard. And it's really great. And I'm happy always to share with people two things about Silver Lake. Number one, the dollars that you give to the conference, and this church is generous to the conference, and I want to thank you for that. Your resources help to make Silver Lake affordable for young people. Sometimes when we're talking about OCWM, folks are like, okay, I don't really get all those initials. What is it? Where's the money going? You know, if you're giving your money to Simply Smiles, or you're giving your money to a local food bank or a shelter, it's sort of like, that's direct. I know exactly where the money's going. But when you give it to the denomination, it can feel like the money just went out the window. I don't know where that's happening. This is one of the places where your dollars and cents makes a difference. We couldn't charge the affordable rates we charge for this week of service. We couldn't provide the scholarships we provide. There is never a young person that's turned away from Silver Lake for lack of money. And we could not do that if it weren't for you. So give yourselves a round of applause for your support of the denomination and the Silver Lake. The second thing that I like to tell people about Silver Lake is that over 200 clergy, okay? Over 200 clergy spread throughout the United States of America cite Silver Lake as the place where they heard the call to ministry. I think that's worth applause. Over 200, right? So we're not just, your gifts aren't just supporting the ministries here in Connecticut, but each one of those pastors, each one of those chaplains, each one of those clergy persons that's serving anywhere in the United States, that's your money at work. Whatever ministry they are performing, that's your dollars and cents at work. So please do avail yourself of Silver Lake. Second thing, second commercial, we're coming up for our 4th annual youth revival. We have a youth revival every year. I preach at the revival. Young people, more importantly. Luke. No pressure. Use this. You can use this. That's all I'm saying. I mean, we'll take that. Do what you want with it. But young people preach at this service. It is an intentional, multiracial, multicultural, intergenerational experience. We found over the last few years that this service is the most diverse service that we have at the conference level ever. More diverse than our annual meeting, more diverse than anything else we do. Clergy come, youth groups come, adult leaders show up, and there are young people who are preaching and dancing and singing, and we have an absolute wonderful time. So I hope that you'll come. There's some flyers over there, but it is on May the 17th this year, and it's going to be at the Dixwell Avenue UCC Church. And then my last commercial, I promise you have been a wonderful host. You did not push the button to speak through the commercials, and for that I'm grateful, because it would have been hard for me to do that. That would have been hard. Luke could do it, but I was I told you it was fabulous. And so I want to make you aware that we have engaged in sacred conversations on race in our conference, and we have grants available. So if you would like to have a discussion here, if you'd like to be involved in a particular event, you can apply for a grant. You can also contact my office if you'd like for us to come and to do a teaching for the Sacred Conversations on Race. So those are my 3 announcements / commercials. And now to our scheduled program. Give yourself a round of applause. And again, copies of those things are over on the desk, so we're able to do it. Our mission, and there is a team. We are very blessed in the Connecticut Conference to have an entire team for youth and young adult ministry. No other conference in the United Church of Christ has that. I'll say that again. We have a team, more than one person, who's responsible for youth and young adult ministries in our conference, and no other conference has that in the United Church of Christ. Because of funding changes and shifts, we have made a dedicated effort to strengthening that ministry. And the goal of everyone on the team that I'm proud to lead is to do this. We are growing a faith-forming, multiracial, multicultural, open and affirming, accessible to all, just peace, globally minded movement of youth and young adults. Okay, now, it's a mouthful, so I'm not going to ask you all to say it, but we can at least jump in on the last part. When I do this, you say, movement. Oh, come on, you can do better than that. Movement. There you go. So together, right, you all and us together, we're growing a faith-forming, multiracial, multicultural, open and affirming, accessible to all, just peace, globally minded movement of youth and young adults. That is so good. So good. Taking him on the road with me, except that would be illegal. Never mind. I will ask his parents if he can come. And so, in case you have to leave, I always like to give folks what I like to call takeaways. It's a lot of information. It's a lot, to take in, especially in a single setting. And so I like to give folks some takeaways. If you don't hear anything else, if you don't remember anything else, these are the takeaways. Number one, if you have someone at your church who you are making responsible for youth ministry, for children's ministry, for ministries with youth or young adults, even if you can't pay them a salary, even if this person is a volunteer, what you can do as a church that will do more than anything to support that ministry is to pay for them to have a smartphone package. Include that in your benefits. It's not a benefit that we've included historically, but I'm telling you, young people respond to texts and not emails. And if you want the person who's working with you to have a direct line to them, to be able to tell them what's going on, to encourage them, the days of tacking it up on a refrigerator, no more, right? So if you don't do anything else, pay for that. It is a great, great benefit to offer folks. We understand, we want you to be in contact with our young people. We're going to pay for you to be able to send unlimited text. So do that. Number two, you have to earn the trust of youth and parents. Gone is the time where we simply say, y'all come. Okay, let's be clear. I would say y'all come. But gone are the days when we simply open our arms and folks come to church. Those days are gone. You have to earn trust. You have to earn the trust of youth, and you have to earn the trust of their parents. So just remember that each time you are extending a hand, it's an opportunity for you to earn that trust. The trust of the parents and the trust of the young people. Number three, youth are going to come to Youth are going to come to I say again, the youth will come to They're not going to come to all. One more time, youth will come to They're not going to come to all. I don't care what you do, youth will only come to It's not your fault, they're not going to come to all. This is a takeaway. We often as church people, we absolutely beat ourselves because young people are not coming to everything we've offered. And we think if we do a better job, if we package it, if we put some snacks, if we put down pizza, they're not going, they're not, not gonna happen. Not gonna come. Not gonna happen. They will come to but not all. They will do but not all. I'm saying they will do but they're not gonna do all. Just not. Okay? This is a takeaway. If you don't hear anything else, just know that. You don't have to beat yourself up about that. And then the next tip to take away is that faith matters, and you have to say and show why. Right? It's not osmosis. It's not, if you're sitting next to me, you'll get that this is important to me. It's not. You have to say it. You have to say this matters. And then saying it matters is not enough. You don't just get to announce, this is really important. Yeah? Really? How do I know that? How do I know it's important? What have you done that demonstrated that this is important in the context of your life? Right? That's a part of the earning the trust. And then finally, welcome is essential to growth. People have to feel welcomed in order for anything to grow. 21st century. Okay? So, if you don't hear anything else, if the dog chews the handout on the way home, and you fall asleep after this, it's fine. I still love you. You only have to stay away from church. If any of that happens, just remember these to-go items. Pay for the package. Let them have unlimited minutes. Volunteer, full-time person, 2/3 time out, whoever it is that you want to work with this demographic. You foot the bill for them to be able to be in contact with them. You have to earn the trust. Youth will attend but not all. The things that are going, faith matters, and you have to say it and show it. And show it. Very nice. And welcome is essential to growth. Give it up for Louise. So like this, you gotta. Oh, I'm sorry. Raising the roof. My bad. So here's the thing. What we're going to talk about today are three things, okay? And the first thing we're going to talk about, the first two things we're going to talk about are cultural transitions that have happened outside of the church that have impacted the way that we do church. Okay? So we're going to talk about things that have happened outside of our control, outside of the church, that impact the way that we have to do church. So the first thing we're going to talk about, first two things, are things that have happened outside of the church that impact inside the church. So here's what I'd like for you to do. Please take one hand, put it on your chest. Take the other hand, put it on your chest. Repeat after me. It was not my fault. Look at your neighbor. It was not Why do I say that? Why do I say that? Because as we talked about this morning, from a Pauline text with regards to leadership, we judge ourselves based on numbers. And so we remember the 1950s, or someone told us about the 1950s. And back then we had numbers, right? And so we say it must have been something we've done because today we don't have those numbers. So it must have been the curriculum that we purchased. That means it was my fault. It must have been the person that we let go. That means it was my fault. It must have been the leader that we hired or failed to hire. Therefore, it must be my fault. Because we don't have the numbers. And I remember when we did have, and we don't have any now, so it must be, or it could be. No, you just picked better curriculum. We wouldn't be in the mess we're in now. I don't know what you were thinking when you picked the curriculum. I don't know why you hired the person you hired. Buddy, everybody here knows. Thank you. He was like, it's not my fault. You just said it. I'm claiming it. Perfect answer, right? And so we do that, right? We look at each other. We look at parents, you know. If you would just be willing to arm wrestle your kid to church, we wouldn't have this problem. You know, if you would just force feed them, then they would come. And the parent is like, this is not very welcoming. I'm feeling welcomed here, right? And we do the same thing with young people. We find a thing that young people want to do, and so we say, okay, if you want to get to do that with the church, here are the 17 other things you have to do in order to get to do this. And they're like, that is pretty costly, never mind. I'll do it with somebody else. So it's important to understand that, yes, there are some decisions we have made in the church that impact what's going on, but a large part of what's happened are things, cultural shifts that have occurred outside of the church that are impacting inside the church. So the first one of those cultural transitions I want to tell you about is what I like to refer to as the perfect storm. Right? Three major things that happen outside of the church that have impacted the church. Does anybody still remember the movie The Perfect Storm? Had George Clooney. No, you don't. Really?
Well, I've seen a couple of scenes
On screen. Oh, impressive. And your name, sir?
Chase.
Chase. Luke and Chase. Would you give it up for Chase? It's awesomeness, not just with the tie, which is pretty fly, I say, but also that it's like, it's your fault, Chase. He was like, no, it is not. I know you're standing in front, but you're not the boss of me. Wait, I wasn't even here when they picked that curriculum. Right? So that's the right answer. I appreciate that. So some of you remember the movie The Perfect Storm, right? And in the movie, there are these three storms that create this triangle that George Clooney's ship can't get out of. And it's George Clooney, right? And Mark Wahlberg. So we have every expectation that they're going to be able to get out. Look, if George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg can't get out, you should really give yourself a break. Don't take it. I mean. So, this storm is huge. And it covers all of us. It covers every church, regardless of the city. It covers every church, regardless of the denomination. These changes have impacted every church. So even though it may look like, as you look across the street and down the hall at another church, oh, they have, this storm covers everybody, right? Or as we like to say in the South, everybody. Right? Now we say everybody in the South not because we don't know how to say everybody, but because in the history of this country, country, we've often said everybody without meaning everybody, right? So in the South, there's a way of distinguishing between the old school everybody and new school everybody. We say everybody, make sure we know we mean you and you and you and you, right? We're not leaving anybody on the side. So what are the three things, the three parts of this storm that made the perfect storm? The first was a loss of trust in institutions, right? 50s, 60s, we began a steady decline in our understanding, appreciation, and respect for institutions. Think Vietnam War, think civil rights, think the first significant transition of wealth, right, that happened in the 80s, the idea of trickle-down economics, which did not trickle down, kind of over up here, right? And then Enron, United, all of these major structures that we had known in the 40s and 50s to be secure, to be safe, to be intended for us, starting at about the mid-50s and working its way even now, we began to lose our sense of trust in those institutions. That impacts the way that people see church, because church is an institution. So we're not excluded from that, right? Insert the Catholic Church.
Trust issues.
Right? So it used to be, if you had a priest in your family, big deal, right? Good job. Used to be that if there was a 20-something-ish man who was expressing interest, wanted to volunteer at the church, wanted to be helpful, wanted to take a couple of boys under his wing, we would do what? We celebrate that. That's great, right? Today, if a 20-something single man expresses a lot of interest in a young boy or a group of boys, what do we say? What is that about? Right? That loss of trust. It's pervasive. All of us have been impacted by it. What's the second thing that happens? That lack of trust impacts money. When you don't trust something, then the money gets funny. Right? If I'm not sure about you, then
Money goes away.
say again?
Money goes away.
Money is funny, right? That's how we show our investment. I like you, I believe in you, I think you're doing a good job, I'm going to give you some. I'm not sure what you're doing with the money, I'm not sure what you're doing, and the money gets funny. It's funny, right? So we start pulling back resources from large institutions. We start pulling back those resources. We don't want to give as much in taxes, we're not sure where it's going, we don't want to give as much to large corporations, we don't know where it's going. So the resources that used to be provided for young people by the state, by the collective, are now being taken away because we don't have the money for it, right? And so now something else has to move in there to take care of those options. What moves in? For-profit companies move in, right? So now Nike's going to make sure that young people have an opportunity to practice and be engaged in sport. Now they're going to do that. Now that's great that Nike's willing to make sure that both Chase and Luke have a great opportunity to hang out after school, but Nike is not the same as the Boys and Girls Club. And Nike's not the same as YWCA. Why is Nike not the same? They want to make money. They are primarily interested in identifying and securing new customers, right? And so for Nike, they are not interested in Sunday as a day of worship. That don't have anything to do with making new customers, right? So for Nike, Sunday is a whole new demographic, right? So we see this increase in options now. When we grew up, if you were born before 1980, we had one basketball team in town. It was a basketball team at your school, and you either made it or you didn't make it. That was it, right? There was one football team, you either made it or you didn't make it, that was it. Now, though, there are many basketball teams. There are many football teams. There's a town one, there's a traveling one, right? And those are being sponsored by individuals who are primarily trying to create customers, right? They're not working to create citizens, which is what we were concerned about when those things were being paid for by our big communally supported institutions. So that increase in options, now I can do a whole bunch of stuff on Sunday, right? The shift in finances, now I pay for those places that I feel the most secure, the most safe. I'm not willing to pay those folks I'm not sure about. Added on the lack of trust for all things that are beyond and outside of my immediate family, create the perfect And in the center of that storm is your fabulous church. Right? And so you wake up on Sunday and you're like, where are the kids? And when Pastor Berkey says, invite somebody to church, I'm not really comfortable doing that. And when something happens in the church, the trustees make a decision, the deacons make a decision, and you don't like it, I'm not really comfortable making a pledge. I'm there, right? And so the impact of these things that happen outside of the church, this wasn't any decision that you made. Did you make these decisions? Did you do this? Are you sure? You look like the kind of guy who could make this. You look like the kind of guy who could make that decision. People would follow and listen, like you just have that look. You sure when you got it? Where did he learn that lesson from? Kids. Like, yeah, he was paying attention. This is what you do, right? So what's the impact of that? Well, the impact is that we are still judging ourselves based on numbers, but now because of this pervasive lack of trust, none of us want to ask new people to come. That's a problem, right? One of these things has to change. You either have to not judge yourself based on numbers, or you have to be willing to ask people. But those two things together, they don't work, right? So there's a decline in membership for all mainline denominations, right? So it's not just us. It's not what did we do, we did something wrong. Everybody, the Baptists, the Methodists, and I mean all the Methodists, right? The United Methodists, the African Methodists, the Episcopal, the Free Methodists, everybody Methodists, right? All of us, Presbyterian, Episcopal, everybody is seeing this decline in membership because we're afraid to ask people to come to church, because asking someone to come to church means having to deal with that distrust. And I don't want to ask that, right? I don't want to have to explain and account for what we've done in our church for the last 50 years and what happened. I can't do all of that. We have lost Sabbath in the mainstream, right? Used to be you couldn't do anything on Sunday but come to church. Everything else was closed. Now you can do anything on Sunday that you can do any other day, right? And so the impact of that then is that we are now competing with a much bigger market on Sunday. How many folks remember MASH, the TV show MASH? So do you remember when MASH went off the air?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, for the next few years, anytime any other show went off the air, what did they compare the numbers to? To MASH. You remember that? Anytime any show went off, they would try to see if it had the same numbers that final night as MASH to determine the impact, the cultural impact of that show. When is the last time they compared something going off the air to MASH?
Sopranos.
Friends. Friends was the last time, right? Do you know why they made that shift? Because when MASH was on the air, there were 4 channels. That's it. There are now 5,927 channels. So it would be unrealistic to judge a television show today when the market has so many more options. So why is it okay to judge Pastor Berkey and whoever works with youth and young adults as if we still only have 4 options on Sunday? I'll just hum while you think that Thank you very much. Right? And so what this creates is what we often understand as a sports and spiritual cultural clash. Right? When there's a certain number of people in the church who are like, we're going to talk to all of the coaches in town and explain to them how important it is to be to church, or we're giving some poor parent the 5th degree because we can't believe that they have let Jessica play in a basketball game on Sunday when she couldn't be in church, right? And it becomes this either or instead of being all man. And so we have this culture, these large cultural things that are happening that are impacting the church. And then we have what's impacted every church throughout the centuries, which is a generational divide. But the starkness of our generational divide is larger than any other church because of the advances in technology. So I want to say that again. All churches throughout history have had to deal with generational divides. But none has had a more stark difference than ours, our contemporary setting, because of the advances in technology. What do you mean by that, Reverend Day? If you go to college today as a freshman and you are in an engineering program, they tell you your freshman year that what you are learning in that year will be obsolete by the time you graduate. That's how big the divide is. Taking a course, you're going to judge me by my ability to know this information in the course, but you're telling me I'm not going to need any of it in 4 years. That's how big it is. So, how many folks were born before 1980? Okay. Here's the divide. Here are all the characteristics that I've developed for the divide, right? And I've learned these characteristics from my work over 25 years in youth and young adult ministry. Okay, this comes out of my experience in churches, in ministry, all over the United States of America. Number one, we like to learn things one at a time. We'll learn anything you give us, as long as you give it to us one at a time. Right? That's how it is if you were born before 1980. That's the environment in which you were taught, right? You're going in, you're studying, your mom says turn off. Right? Be silent. You're studying. You're just supposed to go in your room, sit at the desk, have a book, and a pen, and a paper, maybe some highlighters. Right? And that's it. One thing at a time, pre-1980. We use technology to support the relationships we already have, right? So for us, we remember a time when the internet was this big, scary thing, right? So we don't want to engage in the internet without knowing who's on the other side. That loss of trust, right? We see it as a dangerous place. So we're not going to go out there and make a new friend. We got to go out there and be with the friends we know. For us, to use technology in a different way would be the equivalent of me taking a phone book, if you can find one, opening it up and saying, MCCA, hey, McCall, nice. Dialing the number and saying, hey, McCall, my last name is McCallister. We got like at least 5 things in common. I was wondering if you'd like to go out and have some meat. Right? People born before 1980s, like, well, who would do that? Right? That's not how you form a relationship. So we struggle to understand that because we use it to support. For those of us born before 1980, we were adults before we had significant experiences with diversity. We're an adult. I'm saying significant experiences. Not any exposure, but significant. 2, 3, 4 characteristics. You might have had somebody in your town who's a different color who went to your school. You might have had one person who's a different religion, but you were not bombarded by difference in your personal experience until you were an adult. You graduated, you went off to college, you graduated, you went off to the military, you graduated, you went off to your first job, and then you were like, good Lord, who knew? Right? And even if your parents made an intentional decision to put you in a diverse environment, it was not mimicked in the media. In the media, you had a limited exposure to diversity. There used to be African American shows, but there was only one at a time. You watch Good Times, that went off the air. Right? You watch Jefferson, that went off the air. Right? You watch Sanford's Son, that went off the air. Right? So you got it one at a time. If you opened a mainstream magazine, you didn't see faces of color. If you looked on TV, you didn't see faces of, they weren't anchors, and you didn't have that exposure. So even if your personal life had it, what was reflected back to you didn't. There were black magazines, Ebony, Essence, Jet, right? And let's not even talk about being Latina, right? You just didn't have that. No one on TV had an accent. Nobody. Right? Didn't matter what they looked like, you had to speak in a way that sounded like middle America in order to get a job. right? So it wasn't until we were adults that we're having that exposure. And then Sunday was about the community of faith. Didn't matter if you were a very religious person or not, the church was the center of culture. And so on Sundays, everybody went to church. It's where you did business meetings. It's where you engaged other people. So everybody goes to church. So there is a cultural inertia that carries you to church. Do you understand what I mean? The majority of your friends are also at temple, in synagogue, in church. We are all going there whether we like it or not. Right? And there isn't anything else we can do. We have no rebuttal to our parents when they tell us we have to go. Because there's nothing to do. There are blue laws, cultural influence, that shut everything down. I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C., in Maryland. And I remember distinctly the secular radio station would turn to gospel on Sunday morning. Some of you are nodding your head. And like from the time it would take you to drive to church to when they thought church was over, it would only be gospel. And so on the ride to church, this is a true story. On the ride to church, we would be listening to like our favorite 93.9 or whatever, but our church kind of ran long, so after church there would be like no music in the car, because it would have gone back to secular, so then we just ride home in silence. Because my mom wanted us, we just came out of church, so she didn't want us to like come from praise the Lord to shake it like that, shake it like that, shake it like that for Jesus. So there was all of this focus. We couldn't go to the movies till 1 o'clock. You couldn't do anything, right? So there was cultural support for church. So it was easier to ask someone about going to church, participating in church. But what if you were born after 1980? Raise your hands. You don't like single stimuli. This does not work, right? You've grown up in an environment where you have been bombarded with stimuli. And physiologically, you have shifted to adapt to that. That's what the human body does. And so people born after 1980 are accustomed to being able to receive information on layered planes of stimuli. It's amazing. I've been in a class with young people and shown a video while I'm having conversation with them. And the young people were looking at me, paying attention to me, but could mark what was happening in that video and how it connected to the lecture I was giving. They could tie those things together.
A few.
Right?
A few.
No.
A few.
I'm serious. Across the board, if there's music playing in the background, and I'm talking, right, and I raise a theme that's consistent to the music, the vast majority of the young people I'm talking about catch that music was connected, that these things are consistent. If it's dissonant, if I'm playing a song in the background that has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm talking about, they notice that it doesn't have anything to do. They're like, what is that about? Why is that in the background? Right? Not that they don't want the music, but they're like, these two ideas don't go together. You're talking to me about love, right? But you're playing a Snoop Dogg song and it's not about love. What's that about? And so we have often viewed this ability to receive multiple stimuli. If we're born before 1980, our cultural preference and prejudice gets in the way of seeing this as a benefit. So we're like, these kids can't focus. Right? These young adults are so busy multitasking, and we have all kinds of studies, and we are missing an opportunity to communicate on multiple planes. Right? When I used to watch TV as a kid and there was the news, there was one guy sitting in the middle, it was Walter Cronkite, well, I can never say his last name, right? And it was just him. If he said something, right, you all listen. And when I watch Anderson Cooper, there is a ticker going on the bottom, and that ticker is ordinary people talking. And somehow, Juicy 127 knows as much about the Ukraine as Anderson Cooper. Right? Because the fact that they are showing them in the same space communicates an equality that I wasn't raised with. These are the people that have the information. This is the real news. That's just your opinion. And now they function like that. So think about that impact. For most people born after 1980, they had a significant exposure to diversity as young people, not as adults. Turn on the TV when you get home, if you have cable, and go and look at Nick Jr. Look at Nickelodeon. Look at BET. look at VH1, look at MTV. All of them have a specific demographical set that they provide in all of their shows. There's gay kid, there's white kid, there's kid of color, there are adults, there are children. The children often tell the adults what to do in the shows. The adults listen. The children and youth run their own businesses, companies, websites. Parents in the room, they're like, that's so true. Right? So when they come to church and they don't see that diversity, they are asking questions. One of these things is not like the other one. Now, if you had an opportunity to grow up in a multicultural context, to have your sense of identity, to know who you are, to understand yourself, and then as an adult to experience diversity. Imagine what it's like to be these guys, when they're still trying to figure out who they are, and they're being bombarded with diversity every day. Do you think they're going to have different questions than you have? So here's my question. Where's the place they get to ask those questions? It's a real question. Where do they get to ask them? Because for many of us, when we think of youth group, we think of our youth group. We didn't have to have a conversation about being LGBTQIP. Yes, I added some more. We didn't have to have that conversation, right? We didn't have to have a conversation about post-racial, whether we're in a post-racial or not in a post-racial America. We didn't have to have that dialogue. So we have a group of youth and young adults who are growing up in the most diverse generation we've ever created in the planet, so says Eboo Patel, and they have the least amount of resources to deal with it. How do you think that's going to work out? What can the church do to aid post-80s people who have these questions and want to have this dialogue? How can the church be a partner in providing spaces to have this conversation? Right? And how do we do that when, if we're born, if all the people who are running the church are pre-1980, if we're carrying our cultural biases into that dialogue? And I give you a perfect example of what I mean. I can't tell you how many youth groups I go and talk to, and the youth leader will say to me, you know, these kids are always on something. When they come to youth group, we have a basket at the room, and as soon as they come in, everybody's got to drop off their cell phone, because we're not going to do that. We are actually going to look at each other and have conversation. Really? Because for them, pre-1980, the idea of having that technology is that this is a distraction, because if I'm trying to learn, I can only do it one thing at a time. So if you're talking and I've got my phone, you're not going to be able to hear me, and I want you to learn, so I want to remove the other stimuli so you can focus on, which is, except that person is learning by engaging their cell phone. And are often using it as a primary form of communication. Think about this with young adults. One of the things that I would say that always surprises me about this divide is the when. Right? I grew up at a time where you don't call people in the morning before 9 o'clock. And you don't call people who aren't family members or it's not an emergency after 9 o'clock. Right? 8, 9 o'clock. That's it. If you call somebody before 8 o'clock in the morning, if you call somebody after 10 o'clock at night, somebody must have spontaneously combusted. Or we think you have no manners whatsoever. You were born in a barn and raised by the animals. And you should not call during the what hour? Dinner hour. Dinner hour. We are right. We're sitting at the table. Right? Like, how rude can you be? But If you were born after 1980, you have been born into a world that has more ways to communicate, right? So a 25-year-old will send a text message at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? Because that's when they remembered it. And they'll send an email at 4:15 a.m. because that's when they had a chance to get to it. And it is not their expectation that you were up to read the text message, or that when the email came, you were supposed to stand up and go to your computer and read it. In their mind, when you wake up, then you'll see it, right? But imagine how that gets played out if we don't have this discussion. And you're inviting a young adult to be a member of the trustees. Or you're inviting a young adult to be a deacon. And you're trying to figure out how you are in dialogue with each other. And all of the other trustees are like, oh,